Well, hi, Mark. First of all, great to see you again. It's always so
Yes.
fun to connect, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you today. So, no, I mean, we are. This is a very interesting time in education, and I worked in education for quite many years, and it's one of the most interesting times, I think, because we are at this place where we're in between some really serious challenges, some challenges that are more difficult than any, I think, that we faced in decades, and at the same time, at a time where there's some opportunities for innovation that are greater than any that we've seen in decades. So we have this sort of confluence of like really tough stuff and really awesome things that we can do differently, and that just it makes it exciting, but it also means that we have to be doing things like thinking very thoughtfully about how are we preparing next generation of educators? How are we redefining the roles of parents and students and leaders in the education system? What's the role of technology, right? All of those questions are coming to the surface and sort of forcing us to think differently about stuff we've done for many, many years.
Well, I want to warn our audience that this is going to be a 5-hour show, and because it'll take us a while to get through
But I
everything.
promise you it won't be.
So, Richard, I'm thinking back. I think technology entered the classroom roughly 2 generations ago, 40 years ago. And then 20 years ago, we had the internet, which radically changed everything. And then 10 years ago-ish, we had mobile connectivity, and we have iPads in the classroom, and we have ubiquitous broadband in the first world, of course. And now we add COVID to that. And when you and I were talking beforehand, you said that kind of compressed the requirement to operationalize this technology, where we didn't have enough access in a lot of homes. The digital divide felt bigger, and you had, homes weren't big enough to have 3 kids in digital schools during that time, and teachers, everybody was trying to flailing. My question, after setting all that context, now that COVID is ebbing, and this summer it looks like all the kids will be back in school, is the urgency to solve this problem going to subside, or is it sticking with us?
I mean, I think it's a slightly morphed problem. So the problem that we had at the beginning of COVID was the fact that we had a whole bunch of kids, true for adults, by the way, but we'll focus on younger people for now. So a whole bunch of kids needing to learn in a virtual space and not having the infrastructure to do it. I have 4 kids. I was running into the same situation. My wife and I are working from home, 4 kids trying to work online. We didn't have enough devices. We didn't have enough bandwidth. Fortunately, I'm lucky to be able to have been able to afford getting another device. Many families weren't able to do that. So we had this very, very challenging infrastructure problem. And COVID was a forcing function for us to make some major improvements there. Maybe not the way we would have wanted to have done it, but it forced us to build out infrastructure that we probably should have had for a long time. Certainly, it was able to help us, get better infrastructure to schools. Definitely to call attention to families that didn't have the right infrastructure. What that allowed us to do is what I would call emergency remote learning. This is not effective digital learning. This is not, the best way I can describe it, Mark, is when you're lost in the woods in a storm, a tarp tent is looking pretty awesome, right? It's going to keep you safe. It's going to keep you dry. It's going to get you through for a spell. But it's not the place that you want to live for the rest of your life, right? You want to live somewhere that does more than meet your basic emergency needs, right? You want to live somewhere that's comfortable and warm and inviting, right? And so I think what we have is COVID forced us to fix some of the infrastructure problems. And because of that, we were able to do emergency remote learning. Now the challenge we have is, with this great infrastructure, are we just going to live in a tent for the rest of our learning lives? Are we going to actually build this sort of amazing, high quality learning experience that we can because we have this infrastructure?
You've teed up an interesting question, in that 20 years ago, I remember helping here in Santa Barbara. I was the head of the Partners in Education and chaired the Technology Council on this. How do we help educators figure out what's the right thing to buy and all of that. And what was interesting is there was a lot of money for hardware, and a little bit money left over for networking, no money left over for software, and zero even concept of support and ongoing maintenance. And it took a good 6 or 7 years to kind of figure that out. Now there's so much educational technology experiences and companies. There's probably thousands. I don't think I'm overstating that. How how have teachers integrated that into the curriculum, which somehow in some cases seems stuck in the 70s?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, before I even answer that, I'm going to add one more thing, which is even farther down that list of things that's down, which is preparing teachers to use technology effectively.
Yeah. Professional
right?
development doesn't exist, right?
That's right. And some of that has started to shift. Again, one of the silver linings of COVID is it's showed us the massive gaps that we had in some places for educators in knowing how to use it. And interestingly enough, Mark, the area where we saw one of the biggest gaps was not with the sort of older, more experienced, whatever word we want to use, teachers. It was actually with our newest teachers. So really? Teachers just coming out of teacher education programs were some of the ones that were actually least prepared to use technology effectively. And the thought, I think was, well, sometimes people use the term digital native. I don't love that term, but these are digital natives. They know how to use, and yes, they were in fact very proficient in using the technology, and actually pretty terrible at knowing how to use it effectively for learning. So we've just launched, actually just a couple weeks ago now, we launched a project with the U.S. Department of Education. It's a pledge for educator prep programs, higher education institutions, EPP programs, to pledge to agree to revamp some things, to rework some things in their programs so that new teachers coming off the line are ready to go in a world that is much more digital than the one that they are stepping out of from their university. So that's one thing that I'll just share off the bat. But getting back to your question, I would add one other piece I think that's really important to note, and that is another shift, which is a shift from how the technology is used. In the sort of previous world, I sometimes steal my friend Michael Moe's adage. He says, we went from BC to AD, right? From before COVID to after disease. And in this BC to AD shift, in the BC world, one of the predominant ways that we use technology was to present content, to present information to a student. And that has some pretty significant limitations. And what we're seeing, the evolution that we're seeing now in this AD world, where we have so much more access to technology, is using that technology much more to connect people to each other, right? So bring in experts and tap into experts wherever they are. Have a student work with a peer who may or may not be in their classroom, right? Have a teacher, have a mentor or a coach who may or may not be in their school district, right? That's the most exciting way to use technology, not just to present, something that you click next on the screen and you next your way through a lesson on the Civil War, right? It's much more interesting to evolve our technology use to use it to connect people together around the content as opposed to just pushing content on a screen.
Richard, this is exactly what Connected Educators was.
Sure.
Right? Because part of it was we connect peer teachers that were teaching same grade level, same idea on different continents. And we were finding that teachers in Kansas were connecting with classrooms in India and doing, pair teaching and all kinds of interesting things. So what I'm hearing from you is we're going to go back to that. That's kind of the next thing that needs to happen. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think of the Maya Angelou quote, who said, she said, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. Right. And I think that just sums up where we're at. Like, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus for what we used to do back then. We did what we knew how to do then, but we know better now. And so now we need to be thinking differently. It's much more of a people problem than a tech problem. It's much more about how are we preparing leaders, school leaders and teachers to use technology, and how are we using that technology to connect people around learning. And we just have to evolve. And at some point, Soon, I hope, looking at the way we use technology even a year ago will be as foreign as walking in and seeing one of those overhead projectors. Now you see one of those and you're like, wow, how did we ever, what was that thing, right? There will be a point soon enough where we look at this sort of, put the PowerPoint on the screen and click next through it thing that is going to feel just as foreign to us as that overhead projector. And it can't happen fast enough, in my opinion.
Okay, so Professor, are we going to walk into a classroom and everybody's going to be wearing headsets?
Well, look, there has been so much hype over metaverse, right? There's everything, metaverse. But unfortunately, what that hype has done, because 90% of it is total hype. Yep. What that hype has done, though, it has overshadowed some really interesting uses of VR and AR that I think are very promising. So, will everybody just sit in VR headsets all day? No, I certainly hope not, and I don't think that will happen. But there are some experiences that are very hard to recreate and very either dangerous or expensive to have a student experience. And those are experiences that can be recreated in virtual spaces in some really powerful ways. I was actually just had a chance to participate in one. So at our event, ISTE Live is the event that we host. We actually had an experience for educators to try learning in a virtual world with headsets. And we took them through some things. One of them was a great experience called the Anne Frank experience. And it was it's a VR, and you can download it. It's available. People can get to it. But it takes you through the story, the life of Anne Frank, and puts you in the context of where she was and what she was experiencing. Right. When you walk out of that, you have a very different appreciation and understanding for a part of history that just didn't come to life off the page. So no, we will not be sitting around in headsets all day. At least I don't think we should be. But having those moments where we can drop in and have an experience. Another one that I went through, which is fascinating, was an experience by National Geographic underwater, where we were actually in an ecosystem that there was no possible way a student or an adult could experience otherwise. Those are the sorts of things that add meaning to the learning because they give context. And that's what I'm excited about.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. The first time so as you know, my background was in computer animation. And so in the early days of VR, and I remember a friend letting me go down 90 foot to a wreck. And I was enthralled. I did not want to leave. It was just so fantastic. So one question I've got, because I've been studying the current state of education, and one of the things that perplexed me as an outsider is that it takes about 7 years to get a textbook written and done and implemented and all of that. So we have this frozen knowledge, and of course it doesn't always change, but we still have that thing from 7 years ago. How is that piece going to shift where we have more reliance on more contemporary, more interesting, more digital content that even if I am going next or however I am immersed in it, are schools paying attention to that more now?
Well, again, we get back to this recurring theme we're seeing here of this shift of the way that we're approaching school in a post-COVID world. And one of the things that's very interesting is I can't even tell you the last time I talked to a superintendent, and I talk to superintendents all the time and chief academic officers, that was talking about placing a textbook order, right? Yeah. That is a thing that, is gone really for all intents and purposes on the backside of COVID. And I think that's really helpful for a number of reasons. One is, as we look at digital content, one, it can be updated much more quickly, which is helpful, but it also allows much more opportunity for educators to adapt and adjust what the learning materials are for individual students. So the tricky part when you have a traditional textbook is you sit it in front, and when you turn to page 75, everybody sees the same thing on page 75. But it turns out that not everybody needs the same thing on page 75, right? Just like when we go to a doctor, the first thing the doctor does is they listen to our heart and they check our vitals and all that. And based on that, they prescribe us some sort of medication, right? But they don't just assume that everybody that walks in is going to get the blue pills because it's Tuesday, right? And that's a model that we've held on to for many years in education and simply does not serve our kids well. Look, treating all kids the same is the least equitable thing you can do. We have to know what students' needs are, and based on that, adapt and adjust the learning to their individual needs. And there's no reason in a digital world why we shouldn't be doing that.
My final question then, based on that. So we're seeing personalized medicine, we're seeing personalized product placement, we're seeing lots of ways where personalization is helping. Are you suggesting that maybe the next frontier is personalized education delivered digitally?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. And it's not only about personalizing, because sometimes we hear personalizing, we feel like, it's just adapting the maybe the order or the speed that I go through. And that could be part of it. But it's also caring about what my interests are
100%.
as a learner.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so interesting if you look at a learner's life outside of school, whether it's in entertainment, whether it's in commerce, whether it's in medicine, all of these other places are very adapted. They're tailored to that individual's needs. The least tailored place, the least customized or adapted place that they experience in their life is school. And that it's starting to feel more and more foreign to learners who are experiencing these other parts of their life where it is adjusted and adapted to their needs to come here and say, why on earth, what possible reason could you come up with for why you're not seeing what my interests are before assigning me that homework, right? And it's hard to give an answer that's a good one to that if we haven't taken some time to learn what the students' needs are.
Richard, you've certainly given us a ton to think about. Thank you.